YouTube? A long time no see. I'm back. Had a very busy time, as you might imagine, being a new dad, but also just doing a lot of other stuff. And honestly, the instrument side of things has not moved a lot. The market right now is really slow, and so I've been looking here and there, trying to find things to buy, and I have found two cool vintage horns in like the last few weeks that I've added to the stable. The first of them is not this. I'll save that for a second. The first of them is this. This is a Conn 100H. This is the 500 bore 8-inch bell instrument that replaced the Conn 6H. Right at the kind of changeover, I think, to Abilene. They made 6Hs for a little bit, I feel like. So 1979, they changed over to the 100H, somewhere around there. This was designed by Larry Minnick of fame. He's the guy. He made a bunch of different things. Invented the open wrap, for instance. He designed the 100H to be just kind of like an upgrade, I guess, on kind of the 5H, 6H. Shares a lot of the same features, but also is pretty wacky in a lot of ways. And I managed to nab one. These have a like kind of tarnished reputation. Abilene Conn, after they moved from not Eastlake, Elkhart. There we go, Elkhart. After they moved to Abilene, quality really took a big dip. It wasn't really super bad, but they were nowhere close to the Elkhart Conns, just in the way they were made. Because a lot of the staff, a lot of the people making the horns did not make the move. So it was new people who didn't know exactly what they were doing. And also the 100H, the 112H, the 111H, the bass trombones that were in the similar series, also designed by Larry Minnick. He like designed these horns, and then Conn went, neat, we're gonna not do a bunch of those things. I think the early ones, they did do all the things Minnick talked about, all the things he designed, and then they simplified them. So something like the Tootsie Roll braces, like you see here, these went away at some point. The fancy grip, like you see on this, that went away at some point. And I've just heard from a lot of people that 100H, bad trombone. And so I've never really thought much of them. I don't need an instrument like this, but this one popped up for a really cheap price. And I went and checked it out, and it's like basically immaculate, like just nearly perfect condition. I feel like I found one ding somewhere. I'm trying to remember. No, there's just a little lacquer spot right there. Like, this thing is like, it's not unplayed. Someone has played it a little bit. But it's just in amazing condition. And then I put in my mouthpiece, and I played a little bit, and I was like, this isn't that bad. I thought it was just going to be bad. That's what everybody says about 100H. You know, it just feels really thin and crappy. It doesn't play well, doesn't sound good. And no, it feels fine. And it doesn't feel small like some 500 bore instruments can. It feels really good. And it came with the removable lead pipes. This one is stuck in here since I don't have a mouthpiece. But it comes with a 1, a 2, and a 3. And again, all designed by Minnick. I played the 2 when I tried it out, and I was like, yeah, this feels really good. It's really funny. The owner had all 3 lead pipes out of the instrument, so it just had the receiver, no receiver in there at all. And I tried to put in my mouthpiece, and it just wobbled, and I was like, what? And he's like, oh, do you want to use one of the lead pipes? I'm like, yeah, you actually have to use the lead pipe to play it. This is not a no lead pipe kind of instrument. Anyway, this has a yellow brass slide with no oversleeves. 6H has oversleeves. A nickel crook. Same, I would assume this is probably the same crook as 6H. I'm going to go over all the odd features here. It's got this little plate right here, so when your right hand is on it, you're not going to wear through this tube, because that happens to a lot of people. It's got this completely oddball hand grip that I don't mind. I think this is something that a lot of makers have kind of tried to emulate, not exactly this shape, but the kind of curved cross brace to make it just a little more ergonomic. This one is scooted up a little bit compared to where a lot of those are, so it actually puts your hand closer to this bell brace. I think 6H is just a little bit of a reach. Things like 8H, it's like a huge reach. It's really uncomfortable. But this is nice and close. It does put a lot of pressure on your middle finger because kind of a lot of the weight of the instrument lands on that. We've got a neck pipe. We've got a reverse tuning slide with Tootsie Roll braces. I kind of like these. They've got this kind of parallel thing. And really interesting is the tuning slide, as far as I can tell, which does move, but it's very slow. I'm not going to take it all the way off. Is very short. This is something that I've seen on modern instruments like BACs, is you don't need like 3 inches of cylindrical tubing. Not that many people are pulling out their tuning slides like 2.5 inches to be in tune. So why not make less cylindrical tubing and have more tapered tubing? The taper is what makes the horn sound good. We already have a lot of cylindrical tubing in the slide, so get rid of some of that. You don't need that much throw between all the way in and all the way out. So that's interesting. The 6H has like a normal amount of kind of old school throw. So this is interesting. I like how they've cut that down. Very fancy like trim rings on stuff. Conns usually don't have trim rings like this. I like that. Nice wide span tuning slide. And then yellow bell, 2-piece, 8 inches. I would assume this is the same dimensions as the 6H bell, but I don't really have any way of checking. I don't have one. And then you can see the left-hand grip here also has this plate. A lot of these things have this plate to kind of protect where your hands are going to be, so nothing is going to wear through. Like, again, happens to some people. I'm not going to play this on camera. I'm trying to be quiet in the house right now, but it's pretty good. I'm just kind of surprised. Everyone says they're so bad. I actually saw the script on the side here, CG Conn, something or other, CG Conn Limited USA, and I was like, oh no, that definitely means like early 80s Conn, and that is not always a good thing. But I put my mouthpiece in, and it just doesn't suck. I'll play this on camera at some point. I've had a few other people play it. They're like, oh, that's pretty good. And they've sounded very good on it too. It's nimble. It gets all over the place. One thing the 6H does, the predecessor to this, which is largely similar, but built more like an 8H, which is like a large bore orchestral tenor, except it's 500. The 6H can be like a little bit too legit sometimes. Not for everybody. Definitely some people don't sound that way at all. But it has like, like rose outers, full length oversleeves, a lot of things you would find on a like large bore tenor in the modern age. And some people don't really like that. The slides can be kind of heavy, for instance. And so I think Minnick wanted to make some things a little lighter in sound, a little zippier. Didn't necessarily need to like project a sound 100 yards, just kind of play into a smaller room, smaller space. And I think that's what the 100H is really kind of aimed at. And so if you're trying to make a bunch of noise, you're trying to play salsa, something a 3B is really good at, for instance, this might not be the move. I don't need this at all. I don't use a straight horn at all, ever, for anything. But for now, I'm going to keep it in the stable. I'll probably just sell it as is, but it would be very cool to put an F attachment on this. I don't think that's going to happen just because of the logistics involved. Just finding a valve that fits an instrument like this is nearly impossible, but a very cool instrument. Again, just totally random find, I think, on Facebook Marketplace for this one. So I've always been a fan of Olds bass trombones. They made instruments from the 60s until like the mid 80s, something like that. And they were really way ahead of the game in a lot of ways. I think the O23, I'm just making up numbers, that's probably wrong, maybe S23, I think O is for large bore tenors, was like one of the very first double valve inline bass trombones. Like just nobody was really doing that, and Olds is just like, why would we not have the valve be separate? You can just use it by itself. So they were one of the very first companies to do that. They weren't always necessarily like modern bass trombones in a lot of ways, but they were really moving the ball forward. This is an S24G. I actually don't know what the G stands for. These have red brass bells. It's not gold brass. They do come with G tuning. I'll talk about that in a second, so maybe that's what it refers to. I have owned maybe just one Olds bass trombone in the past, one of the single valve instruments, a George Roberts model, which is largely similar to this, just obviously a single. And the singles all have 9-inch bells. This is a 9 3/8 bell, so much larger, much more like a modern Bach 50 or whatever. These all have the same characteristics in this era, the S22, P22, S24, P24, all have this kind of setup. They have a heavyweight nickel slide, heavy meaning it's got oversleeves, nickel crook. We've got valves, we'll talk about that in a second. All nickel valve wrap, a nickel tuning slide, and then a red bell. So the whole thing is nickel until the bell. I think that's really neat. Nobody does that now. There's probably a couple instruments out there you can order like this, but I think it's really cool. These also have the George Roberts lead pipe. George Roberts was an Olds artist. He helped design, especially the singles, but I think these as well. And so they have that George Roberts original lead pipe that everybody's tried to copy, like Brass Arc, MK Drawing, all offer this George Roberts lead pipe. That was in this. This just came with one. These also have very wide slides. I'm pretty sure they're just as wide as a 42, maybe just a little bit less. I'm 42/50, they're all the same. So again, modern bass width, maybe just a tiny bit less. We've got a big square crook, again like a Bach, even though these are not like a Bach in any way. Something cool about Olds instruments generally is that they are through designed. There's no copying of some other instrument in here. Even the single valve bass trombones, including the tuning and slide one, are not designed to copy a Conn, which is interesting because George Roberts played a 70H. That was his instrument for a long time. Then he went to Olds and they designed a tuning and slide single valve bass trombone for him. You'd assume they would just copy a 70H because it already existed and he liked it. But they designed them from scratch. You know, they obviously have bass bore and a bass tapers and a bell, but it's not a copy of anything. They start all the way from the very bottom and design everything for this instrument, which I think is cool. Not a lot of companies did that. Even Bach, with the Bach 50, that bell is based on something else. It's based on the Fuchs Conn. So it's really cool to have an instrument that's just straight up, this is it. This is an Olds, nothing else is like this. That's not necessarily always a good thing. Let's talk about some of the problems with Olds bass trombones. Number one is ergonomics are always a disaster. This is before this stuff had really been figured out. I'm not gonna like hold them accountable for this necessarily. A lot of old instruments from this age, including Bachs, including like Holtons and stuff, are really uncomfortable. And Olds just falls in that category too. If you look at this first valve, honestly, the throw is okay. It's got good action. This is actually plays really well. But this lever is just not in the right spot. It's like an inch too far towards the bell brace. And so you have to really stretch your thumb to get there. And stock, I believe, this, I'm not going to bend it because it might break. This lever is actually even farther back. And so your whole hand is just like super stretched. The second valve has this very simple linkage, just a bar that goes back to the second valve. But that also means that the second valve is actuating into your shoulder or your neck sometimes. Like if you have a collar on, this might just literally hit you. And if you look at the old S23 design, which came before this, they have like this big plate here so that the linkage and stuff doesn't hit you and get caught on stuff. So not perfect. These also have clock sprung valves. If you notice in the lever saddles here, there's no springs. They're just, it's just a saddle. There's nothing else going on there. And that's because the springs are actually clock springs behind the backing plates, which, I don't know, it's not like the absolute worst idea, but kind of we've moved past that, and instead we put these springs in the levers instead. You can also see the stop arms for these are kind of not stop arms. They're stop circles, stop plates. which is also a bummer because that means the bumper is an internal part underneath that's attached to the valve casing. And if your bumper material kind of like breaks up or disappears, you have to take the whole thing apart, basically get the valve out to change it. And of course, those are no longer available. I just made new bumpers for this by drilling out some bumper material that I have, which has worked, but this had no bumpers on it. The previous owner probably didn't even know, and it was just the loudest, clankiest thing imaginable. You might also notice that on the S models, S22, S24, these valves are tiny. These are really, really small valves. I'll show you my M&W for reference, which is obviously a very modern instrument with the latest in technology and stuff. But look at the difference in those valves. These are the same distance away from the camera right now. And the M&Ws, which I don't think are really massive valves, they're pretty just normal rotor size at this point. Those S22 valves are so small, and that's a bummer. They play, in my opinion, quite well, actually. You know, I played a low C at the end of the thing I played at the beginning, but they're small. If you really try to put some air through them, they go, no, that's not happening. And that's why Olds came out with the P22 and P24 models that are really these instruments, just with bigger valves. It's really the big difference. They obviously had to change some of the geometry here to make the wraps fit and all that kind of stuff. But the P models are the more desirable of the Olds bass trombones, just because they do have very good valves that are way more modern than anything in their era. In fact, I was told that Minnick, the guy who designed the 100H, would use P-series Olds valves on Bachs and Holtons and Conns and stuff when he wanted to put on a better valve. But they only made P24s, P22s for like 4 or 5 years in the middle of the 70s. This is probably from the late 60s, early 70s. I would assume probably early 70s. I haven't even looked at the serial number. But they didn't make these horns for very long, and Olds just generally didn't make a ton of trombones, so these are not as common as you might think. These instruments also come in G tuning. If I pull out this F slide, you notice it's very short, and that's because it's actually the G slide. What's cool is they're in the same span, so if you want to play an F/G flat, you just swap them around. And now I'm in an F and G flat. I actually forgot, and this came with the slides the other way around, and I was like, man, I don't want to have a new G flat slide made. That's such a bummer to have to get that done. But no, just swap the slides around and I can just play this as is. Again, the biggest problem is just the ergonomics. That second valve, it's actually not in a bad spot, but that first valve is literally just like one thumb width away from where it should be. These instruments play really well, and they have a really cool sound. It's a very like full spectrum sound that just happens to not be very broad. And that makes people put them in kind of like a bright category. It's only for jazz kind of category. But honestly, I think these instruments do a lot of things really well. They're just held back by ergonomics, which a lot of people just kind of throw them away for. And then, of course, on the S models, the valves are too small. I happen to have 2 Canstool CR valves sitting around that are not really destined for any projects that I have, along with the levers for them. And I think they might make their way onto this. That's not going to be super easy. If this were a Bach, it's cake. You just cut a spot in the gooseneck, put the valves in. They're bigger than the original valves, so you have to make some space. On this, though, the instrument's set up very strangely. We have the receiver for the slide, and then we just have another piece that's separate. I can see a seam here. Another nickel piece that tapers, and then the valves, and then another nickel piece that tapers along with the reverse tuning slide. And this has a really, really long throw on it. So the valves are kind of placed in the only spot they can be. There's not a lot of space. I want to look at some pictures of the P-series instruments to see if they cut down on this piece, or maybe they cut down on this. I don't know. I don't want to ruin how the horn plays generally just to put on better valves. But I have a feeling it'll be so cool to have, the really cool old sound, the playability, the the sparkle you get in the sound, but with valves you can just use and levers that are made for humans and not for not humans. Of course, there's other problems, like the bell brace on these is crazy far back. A bell brace on a Bach is basically where this lever saddle is. It's like an inch farther forward, and that's where you attach the hinge saddle for an F valve. So we'll see. It might not be totally possible, and maybe I'll just end up selling this as is. But what a cool instrument. I have a friend who has a P24G, and he had the valves modernized, so he made them into like normal stop arms. They have new linkages and new levers, so none of this original nonsense. And it is such a good instrument. It sounds so good. It's really even. It's easy to play. They're weirdly not mouthpiece sensitive. I'm using my Lasky 85, which is bigger than anything you could get at the time. And it feels great. You'd think this would only work with like a 1.5G, like an Olds 70H. But no, these horns are awesome. Very excited to do something with this, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.